We'd like to welcome everyone to this very special webinar. We're going to be going over the federal policy picture for 2021, and we're privileged to have a very special guest, Kevin Rubenstein. I consider it a privilege because I know Kevin personally, just an awesome person, doing so much to move special education forward. As a formal introduction, Dr. Kevin Rubenstein is currently the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services at Elmhurst Community Unit School District in Illinois. That's in the Chicago area. He oversees all sorts of aspects of special education, Section 504. And in his work at the district, Dr. Rubenstein has been an active advocate on a state level and also on a national level. He's works with the IAASE. He's a past president there. But I got to know Kevin through working with CASE. He is the policy chair there and also does a lot with the CEC. And really is taking lead. I expect big things from Kevin moving forward. And I'm just excited because this is going to be a great webinar. He's truly keyed into what's going on in Washington, D.C. Prior to working at Elmhurst, Kevin has gotten his doctorate in educational leadership from Loyola University in Chicago and holds a myriad of other graduate degrees. Initially, he went to Illinois State University where he majored in political science. So that's where he's coming from, passionate about special education, passionate about policy and politics, and it makes him uniquely qualified to bring us up to speed. I don't want to take any more time, Kevin. Thank you for coming, and we look forward to hearing from you right now.
Great. Thanks for having me, George. It looks like a few people are still getting their sound squared away, and so hopefully everybody gets that up and running. I am so excited to be here. We've got a sort of full agenda today. So I am the Assistant Superintendent for Student Services in Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205, which is in Illinois, it's considered a medium-sized school district by many other standards. In other states, it would be considered a small school district, but we've got about 8,500 students in grades pre-K through transition. I have the distinct honor and pleasure of serving as the chair of the CASE Policy and Legislative Committee. If you're not already a member of the Council of Administrators in Special Education, I would strongly urge you to join us. I am a member of the CEC Policy Steering Committee. If you feel that you want to reach out to me or get in contact with me, I put my email and my social media and those sorts of things there. So you can always do that via Twitter and, of course, use the hashtag. So just a little bit about what we are going to be talking about today. So we're going to be talking about Congress and what is going on there, and because there's really a lot going on in Congress. We are also going to be talking about the Department of Education and the White House. And then we're going to talk about how you can make an impact. And so hopefully this webinar will meet most of your needs and you'll learn something a little bit new. If you've got questions, I would love it if you could sort of put them in the there is just a ton going on and more changes every day. One of the things that I didn't mention in my role here is that I get to oversee all things COVID in my district. And so it's just really an interesting time. Yesterday, the state released, or 2 days ago, the state released all of the updated guidelines on how to handle isolation, quarantines, all of that other stuff for people who have already received their vaccinations. And I am lucky enough to have already received my first vaccination and got that on Sunday. So that is really just an exciting thing, but it is always a changing landscape for COVID. And so I'm right there in the trenches with you. So let's talk about Congress. We'll start there. So in the House of Representatives, there is a very narrow, much more narrow Democratic majority than there was in the past. So 221 Democrats, 211 current Republicans, and there are 3 vacant seats. So there are a couple of people who have actually passed away, unfortunately, some of whom didn't get to take their seats, another whom passed away after taking their seat in the House of Representatives. And so those seats will actually probably go back to the Republicans. So it'll be a very, very narrow majority, a working Democratic majority there. And I would say and characterize it as really polarized viewpoints. You've seen this on the news a lot lately with people like Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia and Lauren Boebert from Colorado talking about some of their viewpoints and some really, I would say, more significant viewpoints taking sort of center stage and what that has looked like since the insurrection. And then also our typical Democratic colleagues and those sorts of viewpoints attempting to come into the mainstream. And so we really are at a time more so than any point in our history where if you look at the biographies of our new members of Congress, there aren't very many people who are sort of sitting in the middle. There are a lot of people who are on both ends of the spectrum. And so that is really sort of an interesting perspective to have. We have a new appropriations chair, and that is really important to us because the new appropriations chair is a good friend of ours in the education field. And I've got a little bit of a weird and unique connection to her. And then some new members of the Education and Labor Committee. So we're going to walk through a little bit about what that looks like and just some key people to know for educators across the country. So obviously some of the people on the screen you get to see probably all the time. So Speaker Pelosi, and Rep. Kevin McCarthy, who's the minority leader you probably see on the TV all the time. If you're watching CNN or if you're a news junkie or something along those lines, they obviously have a great deal of ability to shape federal policy. And when we at CASE are working with our coalition groups, we are actively engaging with both of their offices on all of these issues. So each of them have specific staff members who work with us on key issues related to education. And so we are already engaging with each of them, with each of their staffs on special education and education issues across the spectrum as we get started. So you can see that right there. Some of the people that might be a little bit lesser known to you would be probably Rep. Bobby Scott. He is not new to his position as the chairman of the Education and Labor Committee in Congress. He is actually probably one of our biggest civil rights advocates in Congress. He is the chair of that committee and has been, and really sees things from a civil rights lens. So he, as we are working with him and advocating for him, and he has a fantastic staff to work with. Some of them are moving on to different positions in other places in our government, and you'll see, we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a bit. They tend to take a little bit of a different slant focused on civil rights. I talked a little bit ago about the new appropriations chair, and that's Rep. Rosa DeLauro, and she's the chair of the Appropriations Committee from Connecticut. So First of all, she has the distinction. This is a really, really good picture of her. I'm just putting that out there. She has the distinction of consistently being listed probably as the worst dressed member of Congress, and that is a mantle that she loves. She loves to have. That's the first thing. And my first roommate when I lived in Washington, D.C. for a short while actually was one of her staffers. And, little did we know that she would go on to such prominence. So Rep. Rosa DeLauro was the chair of the subcommittee that handled education issues. And now she continues in that role. She is now the chairwoman of the full committee, and that is really a big and good thing for us. She previously, for those of you who are really into this stuff, you may have seen her on TV sparring with Betsy DeVos and those sorts of people about some of the things like Special Olympics and other funding issues related to education. Some other people that you probably have heard of, maybe not, that are going to come into play right now. So Rep. Virginia Fox over on the left is the ranking member of the Education and Labor Committee. She's a Republican from North Carolina. And then Rep. John Yarmuth is the chair of the Budget Committee. He's the only Democrat from Kentucky. And the Budget Committee also plays a prominent role, obviously, in bringing a budget to the table and making sure that that gets done. Rep. Jason Smith is the ranking member from Missouri on the Budget Committee. And then Rep. Kay Granger is the ranking member on the Appropriations Committee from the great state of Texas. So we've got a lot of good contacts in each of these offices. Our role as a case organization is to make sure that we are consistently building relationships with each of these offices. And I can tell you that Myrna Mandlowitz, who is our full-time case legislative consultant in Washington, D.C., is actively engaging with each of these offices to make sure that our voices are heard. Let's talk a little bit about the Senate. So there is a bare bones Democratic majority in the Senate. You'll see 48 to 50, and that's not a mistake that I wrote it that way on the screen. So there are actually 48 Democrats. There are 2 independents, Bernie Sanders from Vermont, and then Angus King from the great state of Maine, another place that I've lived. And the 2 of them caucus with the Democrats. So it's a 50-50 split, essentially. And with the vice president, Kamala Harris, breaking the tie, that means that the Democrats are in the majority. What they have decided to do with committees is that the committees are actually evenly split. And so there are an even number of Republicans and Democrats on each of the committees, including the Senate Help Committee. So the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, which is where most of the issues related to education are going to come up. So just some key members for educators that you are going to need to know about. Again, the 2 over on the left, you've probably seen before a lot on TV. So Senator Chuck Schumer and Senator Mitch McConnell from New York and Kentucky, respectively. And again, we've got great contacts in both of those offices. And then over on the right, so Senator Patty Murray is the chairwoman is the new chairwoman. She used to be the ranking member of the Health Committee. She's a Democrat from Washington. And the interesting thing here now is that with the Democrats taking control of the United States Senate, each of these people are reorganizing their staffs. So Senator Patty Murray gets a few new staffers. Senator Richard Burr just became the ranking member. He took over for Senator Lamar Alexander, who just retired. And so he's hiring new staff members. Some of Senator Patty Murray's staff members from when she was the ranking member have moved on to other positions. And so it is just a really big time of change in Washington. And it should go without saying that we know this in education, but we never burn bridges. And relationships are the name of the game in everything that we do. And so that staffer that used to work in Patty Murray's office today or worked in Patty Murray's office today might end up working in the White House on Monday or next year or at the Department of Ed next year. And we may need to engage with them on a certain issue. And so you learn to really work hard to make sure to build relationships over time, to agree, to disagree when you need to. So really some great people to be working with. Even yesterday, as they were, and we're going to talk about some nominations, a show of bipartisan support. Senator Richard Burr agreed to support both in committee and on the floor the nomination of Dr. Miguel Cardona, who's our nominee for the Secretary of Education. Now, not all Republicans agreed to do that, but as the ranking member of the Senate Help Committee, that is a crucial show of bipartisanship in the Senate that will go a long way in the future. So some other things to know here about the United States Senate. So Senator Bernie Sanders, I put Democrat from Vermont. That's essentially what he is. He's going to chair the Senate Budget Committee, which is really an important committee for us. Senator Patrick Leahy, another Democrat from Vermont, is going to chair the Senate Appropriations Committee, while the Labor, Health, and Human Services Subcommittee, which is a part of the Senate Appropriations Committee, behind the scenes, there are a whole bunch of really goofy and crazy rules that govern how the Senate runs. And one of the things that the Democratic majority just did is that they wanted to make sure that some of the more junior members were able to have some committee chairs or subcommittee chairs if they so desired. And so they changed some of the rules. And so they have not yet named the Labor, Health, and Human Services Subcommittee Chair, or Labor H, as we sort of like to call it. It used to be Senator Patty Murray. There is talk that it could be somebody else. I heard on a call this morning that it could continue to be Senator Patty Murray, but we are unsure at this moment whether or not that will continue into the future. So that is really something that we are going to have to keep our eye on, and that people are going to have to tune in a little bit more for. So some key issues to watch. Many of you have heard this word, reconciliation, and reconciliation is it is a really big process right now that is happening right now in the House of Representatives that will allow the federal government to spend additional dollars, reconcile, if you will, additional dollars in this current fiscal year in the budget-related process. So what we have heard and seen is that in the House version of this reconciliation bill, there is going to be about $154 billion for K-12 spending. And that we would be able to use it for IDEA funding, ESEA funding, that it would be similar to the stimulus funds that we received that we just got in December, early January. Only difference might be is that there could be some additional focused guidance coming from the federal government on how to spend them exactly. The House committees have mostly completed their markup process this week. And I say mostly completed. There was one committee that had not completed their markup. And that's important to know only because of the fact that there is this additional $7.5 billion focused on what's called the homework gap, which would bring broadband and high-speed internet to areas across the country and help people to get internet access. And that was a part of this last committee bill. And so that was supposed to be done last night, and they were thinking that it was going to be picked up again today. So that reconciliation bill is going to move to the Senate soon, probably after the impeachment trial is over. And what we are hearing from our sources in Washington is that this is unlike what we were hearing in January and December about the last stimulus package, is that this is not a down payment. This is the payment. This is what we're getting in terms of money from the federal budget. So somebody asked in the chat, what's the markup? So the markup is actually a situation where people, members of Congress, sit down, and any member of a committee can offer an amendment. And they sit there for hour after hour after hour. So the House Education and Labor Committee markup actually took about 7 hours the other day. And any member of that committee can offer amendments to the reconciliation bill. And so they hear the members offer their amendments to the reconciliation bill, and then the committee votes on them. And so some of the amendments get in, some of them don't get in. And so if you're in the majority, like the Democrats, then some of your amendments might get in. If you're in the minority, like the Republicans, then usually your amendments don't get in. So I was watching some video the other day, really important, a member from Illinois, Rep. Mary Miller from far southern Illinois, offered an amendment to create savings account plan for families whose schools are, quote, closed right now, so that they can take the money that is being spent in their public schools, or that would have been received from these from the reconciliation, and take them to private schools. So it's basically like a backpack program so that they can spend their money in private schools. And obviously, CASE and the National Coalition for Public Education that we belong to would adamantly oppose those sorts of things. And we are thankful to have members of that committee who are also really adamantly opposed to that sort of thing. And so it was killed in that committee process. So that's the sort of thing that happens all the time. It goes on behind the scenes, and that our CASE policy and legislative consultant really helps us to watch for. We've also heard that while it is not directly related to schools, there is a discussion around another stimulus bill specifically focused on infrastructure. And that what we are hearing is that money could include some building, that infrastructure bill could include some money for building or rebuilding schools. So think about this as in the 1950s, when we built the national highway system. This is going to be something Secretary Buttigieg from who's now the Secretary of Transportation, one of the things that he has talked about significantly, and he is being advised by some great disability policy staffers. One of the things that he's talked about is making transportation more accessible. Well, in order to make transportation more accessible, we need to invest in infrastructure all across the country. And so there could perhaps be an infrastructure bill, some of which could be designated for pre-K-12 schools across the country, perhaps to recover from the pandemic, perhaps to upgrade air conditioning systems and air turnover systems, those sorts of things. And so we'll have to sort of keep our eye on that. Just some other key issues to watch here. The president regularly presents a proposed budget. He typically does that in February for the next fiscal year. And then we go through this regular process of marking it up with amendments and all of this other stuff. The president signaled this week that he was going to delay that process slightly because of the fact that the Office of Management and Budget is having a hard time getting the records together from the last administration, which is really a big problem. And so they will get that regular budget bill together and hopefully get that through Congress. And one of the challenges about having such narrow majorities in the House of Representatives and the Senate is that you really have to work hard to either A, be bipartisan, or B, hold your coalition together as the Democrats. So you can't really lose anybody. The other thing that I failed to mention is that there are some members of President Biden's cabinet who have been nominated. So like, for example, Rep. Marcia Fudge from the great state of Ohio has been nominated to be a part of President Biden's cabinet. She's a member of the House of Representatives right now. We can't lose her right now for some of these key votes. And so we need for her to continue to be in the House of Representatives before they set up her hearing in the Senate, before all of those sorts of things go on. And so that all of that can sort of be set up. We just want to make sure that everything sort of falls into line. And so there's just a process. Some things will probably get a little bit iffy for a little bit of time for Speaker Pelosi, and there's just a lot to watch for. Other key issues to watch, we are working, CASE has its own legislative platform that we are working to advance, that we've sent to the leaders in Congress and that we will send out to all of our members. It's really focused on eliminating educator shortages across the country, focusing on mental health and social and emotional learning, COVID recovery, and then there are some racial equity pieces there. And those last two pieces of COVID recovery and racial equity are themes that we continue to see as we talk with our members, as we listen to members of Congress, and as you listen to President Biden across the country about talking about his big priorities for his first term in office. So COVID recovery and racial equity. We're wondering if there's going to be any traction for, there are tons of bills that come up and get introduced. I will call them sort of mini bills across the country. So bills related to restraint and seclusion. So we expect the Keep All Students Safe Act to potentially be reintroduced again this spring. Bills related to Medicaid, some reforms possibly for telehealth, a look at dispute resolution. We're not sure if any of those will gain any traction. It seems like there could be some traction and additional bipartisan support. And so we're going to be keeping an eye on those. So let's talk a little bit about the Department of Education. There is just a whole slew of things. I think that when people think about the Department of Education, that people sort of, I used to think that it was like this big open empty space right now until Secretary Cardona got confirmed, and then he got to hire as many people as he wanted to or whatever. Well, so it's a little bit different than that. So there are presidential appointments with Senate confirmations, and that's for the big positions like the secretary, deputy secretary positions, many of them, assistant secretary, commissioner for rehabilitative services, really, really big positions. There are presidential appointments, which don't require Senate confirmation. So other deputy secretary positions, the director of the Office for Special Education Programs, and then some key staff members. So President Biden and Vice President Harris have already nominated people to be secretary and deputy secretary, and we'll talk about who those are in just a second. And then they have already appointed and announced several key staff members, and you can look on the website for the Department of Ed about like who they've named as chief of staff and general counsel and what that looks like for them, because we've again got some really great people who are moving from places like the Learning Policy Institute to the White House, or we actually have somebody from Illinois who's going to be serving as the chief of staff, or people from the campaign who we knew and worked well with to other places in the government. So really sort of a big thing there. But then there are literally thousands of staffers who go through a regular hiring process and stay on through every administration. And so those are the people who day to day are actually working at the Department of Ed. And so the work of the Department of Education continues to go on. That being said, let me just say out loud that the work of the career civil servants is largely driven by the agenda of the president. So for example, if you have maybe an upcoming OCR hearing, you may be put on hold for a little bit until they make some updates to the OCR handbook and how they are going to handle cases. And until they, get some things rolling there. So while the career civil servants are really doing the work and making sure that life is good for right now, the vision and actually what happens at the department largely comes from the people who are presidentially appointed and many who are Senate confirmed. So what we know right now are a couple of big positions. So Dr. Miguel Cardona from the great state of Connecticut, his nomination was advanced on a non-party line vote yesterday out of the Senate Help Committee on a vote of 17-5. And so some of the typical people on that committee voted against him. They didn't say exactly why they voted against him. There was a little bit of a dust up at the hearing. I won't even call it a dust up, but a little bit of a disagreement at the hearing with Senator Rand Paul about whether or not students who identify as transgender should be able to compete in one sport or not. And so Dr. Miguel Cardona, I thought, answered the question really very admirably, depending on your viewpoint. And there are some really rather conservative members of that committee who I think tended to disagree. Dr. Cindy Martin is the nominee for the deputy secretary. She is actually currently the superintendent in San Diego Unified School District. And so she announced in early mid-January that she was leaving San Diego Unified to become the deputy secretary upon her confirmation. We are fairly certain here that after the impeachment process is over, I'm going to peel back the curtain here for just a second. So we've got impeachment going on right now. Then in the coming weeks, they really need to move through the process of reconciliation, getting all of that done in all of the committees, and making sure that that's done. And when we say getting that done in the Senate, they have to either agree to the House versions, which they probably are going to, is what we are hearing, or mark up their own versions and figure all of that stuff out, and then vote on it as a full Senate. And then the other piece here is that they've got all of these confirmations to go through. So they've already confirmed, or they've already voted on the nomination for Miguel Cardona in committee. Now it goes to the full Senate, and so we're just not sure about when that full vote is going to be. There are other nominees like Mayor Marty Walsh from Boston, who is the nominee for the Department of Labor, and so that nominee will go before the full Senate, hopefully in the coming weeks. So just a lot ahead, and the Senate is really packed as a place right now with lots of work. So the Department of Ed is going to start to come together in the coming weeks. I actually said, when George and I talked about this date, I said, oh, we may have like an OSAP director or like a assistant secretary nominee by this point, that sort of thing. And little did we know, we booked this in December, little did we know that we would have this horrible thing, the insurrection and all of that other stuff, and that would sort of dampen a process and really just throw a wrench into everything. So I think that those sorts of things will be coming down the pike in the coming weeks and months, and that we'll be hearing much more about that. So processes and nominees. So Dr. Cardona's nomination, we talked about Dr. Martin's nomination, and then we've just got some other nominations for, the Assistant Secretary for Office for Civil Rights, OSERS, and then the Director of OSAP that as a nomination, not a nomination, an appointment for Director of OSAP. So what to expect from the Department of Ed? I would expect that we are going to be talking a lot about recovering from the pandemic. You should expect to receive lots of guidance documents in the coming weeks and months from a new Biden Education Department. There will probably be lots of revisions to the Trump administration work, or things that they are attempting to correct. So one of the things that's really impacting K-12 schools right now a little bit, but is impacting higher ed significantly, is the Title IX regulations. And so I would expect that there's going to be something, not a complete rewrite, but there's going to be certainly some adjustments to the Title IX rules, and then maybe look to do something quite expansive, and more so with those rules a little bit down the road. In the past 4 years, we've not seen much cooperation with Congress from the Department of Ed. There's going to be a lot of it. In the past 4 years, one of the biggest challenges with the Department of Ed has been that they have not been a fully staffed agency. They have not actually filled positions. So even some of the top positions they have not filled. And so if you actually looked on their website, it would say things like acting director, acting assistant secretary, acting. I would expect to see a fully staffed agency for the first time, and that means that things start to occur much more quickly. It also means for us in the schools and across the country that we are going to, it's like we got to buckle up here, because there's going to be a lot more guidance coming out very quickly. And there could be a lot of changes that they are looking to make. Some of it will be good. Some of it will be a little bit unexpected, and we just need to work together to help to navigate that. I would expect there to be just by the nature of who Dr. Cardona is, and then Joe Biden and his background, and Kamala Harris and her background. Dr. Cardona is an English learner. His parents are from Puerto Rico, and I would expect that there is going to be a significant focus on civil rights. And so I think that we can expect that that is going to continue to happen. So you can expect that we are going to see things like significant disproportionality come back into the center stage. You can expect that students from LGBT backgrounds who are also students with disabilities are going to take center stage. You can expect that we are going to be talking about least restrictive environment. You can expect all of those sorts of things to be happening. So a lot to be happening here, but the pandemic recovery is what we're going to be talking about the most in the initial period as the Biden administration gets going. So let's talk about the White House. Lots of exciting things happening there. So there's an educator in the White House, and don't underestimate the power of Dr. Jill Biden. She is very influential, obviously, in the president's life and in the White House. And our coalition groups are in the process of setting up meetings on your behalf with her office. And in case anybody forgot, it is incredibly important that we remember and remind others that President Biden is a person with a speech disability. And just this video from the campaign trail, I'm going to... Joe,
it's me, Brayden.
Hopefully you can...
The Harrington family is rooting for you, and that we wish you good luck. When I first met you, I was holding in all that fear and feelings about my brother, and it was really good to let that out to you, to somebody who I felt a connection with, and to somebody who's others. There's about a month left till the election, and you know you can do it. All that inspiration you gave me, I want to bring all that back to you. I just want to let you know that it's okay to have a block, and you're probably not going to be able to get a word out this next debate. If you get a block, just do what you do normally, and keep that faith in your heart, and always remember that we're always going to be rooting for you, and that we're here for you.
He has such heart, and his maturity beyond his years. Unless you stutter, I don't know how anyone can understand how difficult to stand up before millions of people and speak to me and encourage me. I mean, it takes so much courage. But he's going to go places. Watch it. You just watch this kid. You know, if I get elected, I'm going to have him down the White House for real. He has an unlimited future. He's a great kid.
So, for those of you, for me, as a person working in education, who has sat in thousands of IEP meetings, and many of whom have had speech disabilities and those sorts of things, to know that the President of the United States knows what a block is when it comes to speech disabilities, because he has experienced it on his own, is comforting. Because I know that many of us have students like that, and he is a warm, loving person, and that to me makes me feel better about the world around us. There are some key staffers making some moves from the House and Senate. I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but One of the things that we see from time to time, and especially at the time where an administration changes, Rep. Bobby Scott is losing some staffers from the committee, and they are moving over to join the White House staff as domestic advisors to President Biden. There are several more people that are rumored to be moving there very, very soon. These people have deep knowledge of schools and are great friends to us in the disability policy community. And we are really lucky to be able to have them there in the White House and to be able to access them on a regular basis and to tap into their knowledge there. So again, some big issues related to schools there at the White House are pandemic recovery and then racial equity. And they are in the White House, they are really focused on these two big issues. Obviously, pandemic recovery is taking the biggest focus right now. And the twin pandemic there of the racial equity, you will start to see much more about that as we probably hit the second anniversary or the first anniversary of the George Floyd incident in Minnesota. So I would imagine that we will start to hear much more about that. Let's talk about making an impact. So CASE has this wonderful legislative action center, and I am going to take you there very quickly and just show you what that looks like, because we've got some really great bells and whistles. And the CASE Legislative Action Center is actually sponsored by eLuma. And so we are really, really lucky. And while right now there aren't any key legislative issues, I can, if I want to, my information is already in here. I can sign up for alerts and click here, and my information goes right in. I can click on here, and now you have all my home address, but I can click on here and I can send text alerts and email alerts and all that other stuff. I'm going to go back here. One of the things that we do very, very regularly is that if I click on view key legislation, one of the things that we are doing a really good job of right now, I think, is that as we sign on to support bills for CASE, we are putting them up on our Legislative Action Center. So you're going to want to look for the things that have to do with the 117th Congress. And we've categorized them into a couple of areas. So mental health, public funds and public education, educator shortages, funding. So for example, we have signed on to support, you can see the green arrow, HR 764, which is the Keep Our Pact Act, so which would require full funding of Part A, which would require full funding of Title I and then IDEA. So if I click there, it shows me the representative who's sponsoring it, Susie Lee of Nevada, and then I can see all of the co-sponsors. So I can actually see here who has co-sponsored it from, all across the country. In a more perfect world, and this is where we're headed, folks, as a more perfect world, is that I will have up on the Legislative Action Center a letter that you can send your member of Congress right from here that asks your member of Congress to support that issue that CASE wants you to support. And then one final piece here is that I can, if I put in my zip code, 60031 and my street address, because I have several elected officials, I can find all of my elected officials right from my area. I can send any of them a message. They're all right here. I can find a biography of Senator Tammy Duckworth, a person with a disability. I can find her official website, Facebook page, Twitter handle, YouTube page, her personal information, any of her staff members, all of this other stuff are right here. And what that looks like are all listed listed right here on her page. So very, very helpful to us and to you as members of CASE and what that should look like. One other big way to make a difference is the Legislative Summit. So in 2020, these are real pictures of when we didn't have to wear masks and when we got to actually be in person and not socially distant. Top 4 issues were that we were talking about educator shortages, mental health, appropriations, and pandemic relief. During the past Legislative Summit, you'll see Jeremy here in the background, George, and the rest of the eLuma team. So we got to meet with leaders and Senator Mike Lee from Utah. We engaged with key leaders from the Department of Ed, members of Congress, and then state leaders from across the country. We want to make sure that you bring your passion from the classroom to the Capitol. Your knowledge of students is definitely needed, and it helps to drive that policy conversation forward. It is remarkable to me when we go and meet with a member of Congress and they say, they say to us, tell me about why this is being done. And we explain to it from our perspective. Somebody's asking, ideas being reauthorized also, right? And there is not talk right now of reauthorization. IDEA reauthorization has been in the future for a while. The next sort of reauthorization bill to be rewritten, to be done, is the Higher Ed Act, and so that still has to be done. We'd also encourage you to attend to advocate for your students. So really one of the biggest things that we can do as educators is to work with elected officials to discuss our beliefs about issues of importance, and then really make a difference. So since that Special Ed Legislative Summit, these numbers are way off, but $400 million new dollars were appropriated to IDEA. 38 additional members of Congress signed on as co-sponsors of our bills, and state legislative conferences are now occurring across the country, which is really fantastic. And this is one of my favorite pictures of the group on the steps of the Capitol. We did really just such fantastic things and had a great time. And so we're going to be sending out more information in the coming weeks about what our Special Education Legislative Summit is going to be looking like for 2021, and how you can participate in that. So with that, I will pause and take any questions.
Yeah, and I'll, before we jump into those, I just want to attest that the work that Dr. Rubenstein and CASE are doing is immense. The impact is tremendous. And having participated in a few of these special education legislative summits, it's such an important cause, and you are moving the needle. I would encourage any of you, if it's within your means, to go. Not only will you go make a difference, but it's a lot of fun. Like, again, if I can't sell you on the cause, it's just you're going with great people and you're rubbing shoulders, and it's really just amazing.
Absolutely.
Sorry to interrupt there, but I did want to put that plug in. And as Kevin said, do any of you have questions? Looks like there's one in the chat there.
Yeah. So let's see. Mary asked about IDEA being reauthorized as well, and IDEA reauthorization is not on the forefront right now, but we are, all of us who are working on these causes are certainly ready to go if need be, and so.
Do you see that as a possibility in the future? I've read that there have been some rumblings. There have been some articles written in some of the various educational trade magazines that have alluded that this might be a possibility.
Yeah. So I think that there is always the possibility that it could come up. It would not be the first thing that we attempt to do. There is so much work to do to recover from the work of to recover from the pandemic, to focus on racial equity, and there's just a lot of work to do in those two spaces, I would say. And so I don't know that IDEA reauthorization is going to be on the forefront, certainly from a disability policy community perspective.
Looks like Mary's got another question for you. Will the cells be in 2021? Will it be virtual or in person?
Yeah, so we are not quite sure yet. I would imagine that there's going to be some sort of hybrid event. This is just speculation, Mary, and all of you. I would imagine that there's going to be some sort of hybrid event. Like I said at the beginning, I just got my first vaccination on Sunday of this last week. I know that educators in at least 24 states are prioritized in the current group, and that by summer, many more educators across the country will be prioritized. But we don't know what travel is going to look like, or what budgets are going to be looking like, and those sorts of things. I do know that I want to see people, and that everybody wants to see people, but we also don't know what visits in person to Congress are going to look like. It's another key factor that we have to consider. We have to take those sorts of things into consideration, and that's what we are doing right now as we begin our planning.
So I've got a question for you, Kevin. You've gone over just a myriad of things and covered a wealth of topics. Of all of the things happening right now, what makes you most hopeful in terms of short-term impact? And then looking at the longer term, what is going to be the big impact thing that you foresee taking place?
Yeah. So I am really excited that we are getting the right people in the right seats, who have just the right knowledge. That's not only the elected members, but also the staffers in all of the right chairs, who are just, we've got people who are moving from the House Education Labor Committee who are experts in the area of disability or higher ed or whatever, who are now moving to the White House and advising the president. That's just really, really exciting. The appropriation, or the amount of money that we're getting from reconciliation, is going to, it has the ability to fundamentally change long term. And if we use it correctly and appropriately, we have the ability to sort of say to Congress, look what we did with that money over the course of this year, and how much it moved the needle on special education and student services. What would that look like if we did that longer term, and started to amp up funding longer term? And how could we do that? And you did it, in 2009, you did it in 2020 and 2021. How could we start to do that on a more regular basis without the need for these reconciliation bills? So those are some things that are just really exciting, and we have to sort of be watching out for.
So awesome. It appears we're at time, Kevin. So we do need to thank you for, I know how crazy busy you are right now. These are crazy times we're living through. So the fact that you would take time out of the day to, go over this stuff with us is, fills our hearts with gratitude. We're really thankful for not just that, but all of the work you're doing. I always tell everyone I expect big things from you, because I know that you're just getting started with this important work. So thank you.
So
Kevin,
happy to be here.
you.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
And as a reminder to everyone, we're going to be sending this webinar is recorded. We're going to be sending it out to everyone who registered. Please feel free to just share it and pass it on. We feel very, very passionate about the messages that Dr. Rubenstein has shared with us. Again, this is such an important work. Thank you all for coming, and look for more eLuma eLuma webinars to come. Have a great day.
Great. Thank you.